Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this session on cybersecurity. My name is Matt Setcher. I'm the IT Services Lead for Laws IT. Welcome to everybody. We'll be going through a presentation. I expect it to be nice and quick, but if you've got any questions, feel free to pop your hand up or ask any questions in the chat and I'll get through to them where I can. So the reason why we're doing this briefing today is you may well have seen in the news recently the increasing cybersecurity threat to schools and education in general in these times during the pandemic, and the risk has risen quite considerably. So this presentation is to show you some best practice, explain some terms, and look at solutions really that you can put in as schools to help you move forward. So this is open to not only current Laws IT customers, but also those other professionals in the field as well. So big welcome to everybody who's joined us this afternoon. So first of all, why is this such a big issue at the moment? Well, this is a result of a survey that was done, the Cybersecurity Breaches Survey in 2020 for the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport. And you can see that all UK businesses, 46% have experienced some kind of disruption due to a cyber security event. So that could be they were hacked or fell for a phishing attempt or anything like that. To the right of that, you can see the percentages for the schools that were asked the questions, and you can see that primary at 41, secondary at 76, and further and higher education at 80%. So it's very prevalent in the UK education and indeed in education around the world. The risk is rising as, in particularly secondary and further higher education, due obviously to the age of the users. Some issues may be down to the users themselves, students trying to test the boundaries and such like, but also because what secondary and further higher education people are doing is using more complex systems all the time online, so there's a bigger risk of attack there. So as you can see, very prevalent, and as say this will be from data from 2019, so the recent data that we can see from the NCSC, which is a National Cyber Security Centre, warns that just on Tuesday this week, or last week was it? Last week, they issued an alert, an update to an existing alert that they put out in September 2020, warning the education sector specifically of a sharp rise in ransomware attacks, and they've seen that since late February. So each attack, obviously, that has happened has had different levels of impact. For example, you may have seen at the weekend on Saturday that the Harris Federation was impacted, and that subsequently caused all of their 41 schools the closure of their IT systems, so all local networks, all online platforms, websites, email, telephone were all switched off while the attack was resolved. I haven't actually checked to see whether they brought stuff back online yet. But obviously, as that has a major impact on the students and the staff, led to coursework loss, no doubt, financial implications and damaging the core information that you need to keep, financial records, and also things around SEN as well. So it has a major risk from the for schools and all the data that they hold. So what is actually happening? What is all this about? Because we say cyber attacks, and it's understanding what that actually means. Well, the first port of call is an attacker gains access to the system. They then will stop you accessing your data on a range of platforms. They may also take some of that data away from you. And then they send a ransom note saying if you want to access your information or you don't want us to share this data, that might be not good for reputational reasons or any other reasons, unless you make a payment, and then you're in that bind where do you make the payment, and the NCSE and the DFE don't recommend that you do. There's no guarantee by payment that the people are going to give you what you want afterwards. And even if they do, you don't know what underlying things that they've put into the system to cause the same situation again in the future. And you can see there the NCSC, again, the National Cyber Security Centre, which is a government agency, part of GCHQ over in Gloucester. They've talked about the current trend, loss of school coursework, financial records, as well as COVID-19 testing data as well. So how do they do it? How do they get in? The primary way is to get credentials. So that's your username and password. That's what they want to get so they can get into the system. It's very difficult for them to get onto the sites physically, although not impossible. So they're looking at a way into your system. So the easiest way for them to do it from their remote locations is to gain your username and your password and then exploit the access that's available. So if you've got a remote desktop server, if you've got a online platform, then they will try to get access from that. But also they can install software which allows them to monitor individual devices. So it might be somebody's clicked a link on a device that's managed and install some dodgy software which allows people to get access that way. But they're looking to get that credentials from you and then get the access into the system. And once they're in, they then wish to attack. So once they're in there, they'll get the information that they need. They will then likely encrypt all the documents so you can't access them, and then they will make a demand for payment. So what can we do to protect? So we've got, as we said on the other slide, we've got credentials that they try to get, then they get access, and then they attack. So our plan back is to protect, block, and recover. So that's to protect the credentials, protect the devices, and the primary way to do that is to implement multi-factor authentication, or MFA, in your school. If you haven't already got MFA, I cannot recommend it highly enough to get it. It's actually free if you're on Office 365, although there are some options which do cost, and I'll come into them in a bit more detail shortly. But that is the main way to protect for the protection for people getting in and out of the system, and it's kind of like a golden bullet. So just hang up on that. Then we look to block them. So if there is a decreased attack area, if you like, so if there is no remote desktops, or if it is limited to specific users, if there is access for administrator credentials, all of that is blocked from. If we can block that, then obviously they can't get in to do any of their bad work. So it's about reducing that risk. And then lastly, if they do get in, it's then being able to recover that data. So ensuring your backups are robust, and also making sure that you have multiple different types of backups, which I'll come on to as well, so that you can understand what's the best way to do it. Now, if you are a normal teacher, not that there's no such thing as a normal teacher, but if you're a teacher watching this, you may be thinking, this is all leadership stuff. Yeah, some of it is pointed at that, but also it's useful for you to look at how you can complete your own backups at home and make sure that you're prepared, securing and protecting your data there as well. So the main ways that we can protect are through three different areas. The first is backup. So ensure that you've got everything backed up, and now that includes cloud data. So lots of schools have migrated their data into OneDrive, SharePoint, Google Drives, and Google Cloud Drives. That needs to be backed up. You're probably used to, and you think that you've got backups of your servers on site, and you definitely should do. But it's important that as leadership you understand that that is then not backed up when moved to the cloud. So we'll come on to in a minute a solution that we can do to help with that. But obviously with all the data over there, you get the savings that you don't need to back up the stuff on site as much, but you do need to make sure that the cloud data is backed up. And neither Google or Microsoft back up your data for you. So that's important to know. Local data still needs to be backed up and stored offline. So I mean by that, you should have a backup that is your day-to-day, but there should be one that's disconnected from the network. If they get in and encrypt your network, it may be the case that they can get in and encrypt your backups, which are connected to your system. So it's important that you've got a backup that is disconnected offline. So if that happens, then you can still recover the information locally as well. For logins, you should definitely have complex passwords in place. So that means that they need to have a minimum of a certain amount of characters, and then include punctuation marks and numbers. There are lots of guides for this, but if you visit the National Cybersecurity Centre website, they recommend a password policy of 3 words. So you choose 3 random words. It's easy to remember, hard to crack. It could be a song lyric, it could be a line from a poem, or anything like that. That makes sense to somebody, but doesn't make sense to any, that it's not easy to put together and guess for anybody else. Now, passwords is also about a couple of changes that they've made in the guidance over the last few years. One is that it's now no longer recommended to change passwords every 30 days. So you should choose a password that's secure and only change it if there is a breach or you think somebody might know it. That stops people from having loads of random passwords and just changing the last number or letter on the end of it, because that doesn't help anybody in terms of security. There's also a really big rally now to reduce the amount of passwords that people have to know. So whenever you're purchasing or putting software into your school, you should have a look and see if it integrates with any systems that you've currently got. For example, if you've got Office 365 and the package or system includes what's called single sign-on with Office 365, then that's really positive, because any existing systems you've got in place, such as MFA for Office 365 or complex passwords, are still in force for those. But also your parents, your staff and your students aren't going to have a different username and password. And generally, the more username and passwords they have, the less likely they are to be secure. In addition, passwords, it should be made clear that yes, they don't have to change it as often, but it definitely shouldn't be used on any other platform. The reason being, if another platform gets hacked and it's got the password that you use and your email address on there, then they've got your credentials and they can use that to log into whatever they want. And again, that's the same for your personal accounts and systems. You should not have the same password. Now, I appreciate there's loads of different systems to put passwords in and everything like that. And we always say in education, don't write your passwords down. But if you're at home, it is safe to write down your passwords and store it somewhere secure. The chances of somebody breaking into your house and stealing your passwords and knowing your username and getting into systems is a lot less than using the same password over lots of systems and then getting hacked. So, if that's the best way that people remember it, fine. However, there are other options. So you can use a digital version of that, a digital vault with all your usernames and passwords in. You can generate a completely random password for all the services, and you've got a browser plugin, a program on your computer. You can have it on your phone as well, and then you put in one master password, which then allows you to log into any other system automatically. That is the best thing to do. We use it in Lords IT. You can imagine how many username and passwords that we've got, and we've decided to use 1Password, which works really, really well. And also, if you buy it for education, all your users get a free copy for home for them and their families to use. So password management is really, really important as well. The idea is to eliminate multiple usernames and passwords. If you can't do that, it's securely storing that information and making it as difficult as possible for people to get hold of them. You've also got the reducing the system access. So when was the last time you went through your list of users on your network and removed anybody who's left the school? And we're not just talking log-on accounts, we're talking SIMS access or other MIS systems, Office 365 if they don't automatically sync, Google the same. It could be for third-party systems that you've got, such as ClassDojo or ePraise or any of those systems. You need to make sure that they either sync with the central resource and disable accounts when people leave, or you need to go through and do regular audits, at least yearly, but preferably termly. Also, in terms of user permissions, it's really important to make sure that only those who've got permissions are the people who need them. And even then, your IT staff should use a policy of them not being linked to their individual accounts. So they only use the escalated details for access when they need to. So if somebody uses, say, my account to log in, then that's not an administrator account, that's my user account. If I want to log into something as an administrator, I use an administrator account. So if they've got my username and password, because because I've been silly enough to put it in. If I've been phished or anything else, then they won't be able to log into the system as an administrator, because that's not my account. So if you do need somebody as an administrator, then it's more important to reduce the chances of people using that login and not link it to something that might be easily guessed. So going back to backups, these are the 5 different types of backups that schools should have in place. So the first one is built into Windows, and it's mainly for if somebody accidentally overwrites something. It is no good in a ransomware attack or anything like that. It's purely for recovery from accidental deletion or edits, and that's called previous versions. It's built into your setups and works on local files. That is just for recovering those accidental user errors rather than data loss. Your course should also have on-site backups, preferably to another building within your school, or at least as far away from the server room as possible. That will be always on and always connected. And generally speaking, there should be a minimum of a daily backup taken, and then an additional one taken at the weekend, preferably to another device. So you've got those on site. The reason being is that these backups are for when your system is corrupted or is infected with something like ransomware and the backups are not affected. You can then recover from the previous evening. If the previous evening backup fails and the others are corrupted, you can go back onto the other device and use the weekly option. These type of backups are now reducing in size and space required as data is moved to the cloud, but they are still important for some systems. For example, your MIS if you're running Sims still locally. Offsite backups are the key. So these are the ones that are disconnected from the system. So if the system gets infected, they are not connected into the system and so can be restored and not be infected. However, that may mean that those backups do have a copy of any virus stored within them if they've been triggered by date and time on there. So it's always still important to use other methods of protection as well. But you should definitely have an offsite backup. So this could be as simple as backing up to an encrypted hard drive and storing it somewhere else at another school, swap it with another school. If you're in Lords IT, we store them centrally for you, and we do them once a week. So they're likely not to be as often as doing a daily due to time limits and window frames in terms of when you can do it when users aren't using the system. Depending on what you can afford is depending on how many retention points you'll have on there as well. But they should be encrypted and should be securely stored. If you've got a teacher who's taken them home, they shouldn't know the encryption password so that the data can't be accessed when outside. So you shouldn't, if you know the encryption password, you shouldn't have access to the offsite backups. That's for your protection as much as anything else, because you've got in your hands and the backup the entire network. So cloud backups, we're seeing more and more come into the fore. Now there's 2 different types, and one that's been around a bit longer than the other. So instead of having an offsite backup, you may back up to the cloud. So if you do that, they'll go to a data center somewhere with a company who stores them there for you for a period of retention and time. This can initially be a bit slower because it has to transfer all the data, but once you've done the initial transfer, it generally only moves over the changes on there. And then every so often it will do a fresh backup, starting from scratch. These are effective, cost effective and useful. It's important to have a note work with your supplier of these to make sure that they're not at risk from some kind of ransomware, which then will encrypt all the backups as well. As I talked about earlier, the other backup is backing up the data in the cloud. So if it's no longer on your system, you need to back up whatever's in Google or Office 365. And I'll talk about our offering for that in a minute, but it's particularly important at the moment where most schools are coming back from the pandemic, haven't adopted those, and are currently working without backups. And then optionally on the 5th one, you may have long-term backups. This is where you might want to keep a longer-term retention of documents. So for example, if you only teach a topic once a year and it comes to the next year and somebody realizes that they've deleted stuff, then they may want the option to go back a year to return it. Now, this is expensive due to the amount of storage that you keep on there, and you generally do 12 restore points, 1 each month, and you're able to go back. However, as more and more stuff is moving to the cloud, this is no longer needed for the vast majority of schools, but you might have it set up. And it's important to know that the difference between the on-site backups, which will only recover it from a very recent period, to recover the entire network, and those type of backups are for user files and the user backup, and the long-term backups for the retention of files. So there are two different types of backup there, and it's important to understand what you've got and what meets your needs. So just a note on cloud backup, Lords IT are launching a cloud backup product. It's competitively priced. It offers instant recovery, unlimited storage of users' Teams, Outlook, SharePoint and OneDrive data, and the cost is £1 per staff member per month, so £12 a year per staff member, and 1 pence for students, so that's 12 pence a month per student. So if you'd like a quote on that, then please let us know. It backs up according to your schedule. You can implement your own retention schedule, and it will back up all your data instantly from 365 to a completely different service. Now, as I mentioned earlier on, Office 365 and Google do not back up your data. They're in their agreement with you. They've got an uptime guarantee, but whilst they do have some backups, they won't ever guarantee it or admit to it. So it's very, very important if you put your data in there, you've got these cloud backups in place. So let's talk a little bit more now about how you can stop issues with the with phishing and such like, and the other ways and what you can do from it. Now, I've talked a lot about National Cyber Security Centre, and you can see here that they've done some handouts, and this one is particularly around phishing attacks and what to do. So it's really important to engage with users and educate them on the key signs of a phishing email. Although, of course, phishing emails are designed to fool people, and they're designed to use and catch people, use common features and catch people off guard. So whilst you can point out key things for them to check, such as the email address, the tone of the contents in the email, whether it uses specific language, so people's names and people's email addresses, or is it just using a generic term? And of course, any pictures and layout changes in there as well, and the standard of the English. You know, they're getting better and better to fool people, and the only surefire way to stop phishing attacks is to use your MFA. If you use an MFA, if they get the username and password, they can't log in because they haven't got the phone. But just as important as telling them about the key signs is to educate users on what to do if they've fallen for it. It's really important that they contact their IT support as quickly as possible, that if possible, they change the password immediately, and that stops all the access coming through. So it's really, you know, it's one thing to tell them to beware of it, but it's going to happen at some point, so what to do when it happens. It's important to educate them on that as well, and know that you in your leadership team has a plan. These things can rapidly be sent out to multiple contacts that you've got externally. So you need to have a plan of action. You know, people will be phoning up the school, people will be perhaps asking on social media channels and via email, and you may inadvertently infect another school who somebody clicks on the links. And we see that quite a lot and quite often. So that's why MFA is so important on there. You can also run tests. So we recently did this in our Office 365. You can run simulated phishing attacks where if people fall for it and they click on it, then you can then, so it gives you a report of that, and it automatically sends out training as well. In particular, stopping phishing attacks is really important for finance and finance fraud, and we've seen that in some of our schools as well. So as I've already talked about, multi-factor authentication requires you to have access to the username and password and a phone or tablet, where you can either get a text message, use an app, or get a phone call. So the likelihood if somebody's managed to phish and get your username and password, then they won't have your phone with the code on, or they won't have access to the app, etc. So it is a surefire way. Now, if you're working in a school, you might not want staff to get the devices out in the lesson, which is fine. The option where everybody can just use it all the time is free. But if you want to, you can buy licenses for staff where you can whitelist the school building, so the broadband. So if they're on the school broadband in the building, then they won't need to get their phone out to log in. It will automatically log them in. We are now recommending also for secondary age students to have it turned on as well, because they have a lot of access into different areas as well, and it's about protecting those from a safeguarding point of view. As I say, it's including Office 365. It's about £6 per full-time equivalent, if you want to exclude a school from it, and other systems offer it, and staff should use it. So if they're using other platforms and they use the MFAs available, so Google accounts, or if they've got other accounts into other systems where it's available, Twitter, for example, they should use it there as well, because MFA is a really important tool to block people from getting your credentials. So where schools have got remote desktop, then this is one of the areas that people are actively attacking at the moment. So our advice is to reduce access to remote desktops. So if it's only because you've got SIMs and that's all they need it for, they do everything else on the cloud, they only allow access to Office 365, don't allow access to other shares. See what you can do, maybe make the remote desktop server no longer on a domain, or block the users that have got access to it from going through to individual shares. Just reduce it as much as possible, so what they've got. Also consider using the HTML5 version of the remote desktop, where it's done through a website rather than using the remote desktop app for people to connect as well. You can also put in MFA, so multi-factor authentication for remote desktop, and that should be a priority, although it is a cost that you'll need to do, so it's worth weighing up. You can also consider, if it is just your MIS that's causing the access, that could be a reason, a tick in the box for moving away from traditional MISs like SIMs or local finance packages, and using a cloud-based alternative where you don't have to have the remote desktop and the security is taken care of by the provider. It's very important to note that some of the most useful things, such as access to SIMs and access to finance systems and access to documents that may be around safeguarding, which is what people want to be able to access outside of school, are also the kind of data you don't want other people accessing outside of school. So it's very, very important that you have either protection in place or you remove the ability to do that. And we can help any school, but any school that we support, with any of those options as well. The other thing that your school can do is take the Cyber Essentials course. Now, if you're in the RPA scheme, there was a pilot for schools, and if you're in that, you get the Cyber Essentials as well. If not, it's about £500. It's certainly close to £500, and it is £1,000. Schools can do it. We can work with you to support you. An external company, ask some questions. We make sure it's in there, and then you've got the Cyber Essentials marked, put on all your paperwork, and it proves you're doing what you say you're doing. You can go to Cyber Essentials Plus, which is a bit more money, and you're actually externally validated for that as well. So it's a very good mark to have on there. Certainly if you're trying to convince parents to use more online systems as well. It's also worth bearing in mind that you can purchase cyber insurance. As I say, the RPA are running schemes where you have to have the Cyber Essentials mark. Many others say that you have to have the Cyber Essentials or some kind of inspection on it. But it basically means that if you get caught out, they will provide assistance. That could be financial assistance, it could be recovery assistance, and it can also be, for example, if there's a data breach, that you get a PR expert who will handle the press, because it is something that gets into the press, as we've seen on there as well. So we can't recommend anybody to you for that, but we can certainly, if you find some suppliers and you would like us to look over it, then Lords IT are more than happy to do that with you. So what can you do as kind of next steps? The first thing I'd recommend for school leaders is to go on the NCSC website, where they've got printable guides, handbooks, especially for education. That's got everything in there as well. If you're a member of Lords IT, or you want to become a member of Lords IT, then we can help you with the face-to-face training or remote training for your staff and easy to follow guidance. We can produce handouts for you. We can run those simulated attacks, and we can do training for specific roles as well. So we've already talked about that and talked about the backup. If you're in our supported schools, we already check your backups for you. That's where you get your techie alerts every week. But you should also consider moving to cloud, certainly your documents and your files from local storage into the cloud where it's more secure, especially with MFA on there. Moving to cloud platforms for your MIS, for your finance as well, are also a lot more secure. And then finally, it's also important to make sure that your broadband is secure as the primary way in. So make sure you've got your firewalls in place. We've seen a lot of schools recently sign up for broadband and just have the smooth wall filtering and think that they're protected on firewalls and they're not, or certainly very, very minimal protection in there. So it's really important that your firewall is there and on, and that's the same on client machines as well. So when we're building Intune devices and handing them out, they've got all the security settings turned on and are monitored all the time for the traffic that comes on them as well. Make sure that you're looking at online backup, both for your servers and cloud backup, and we can help with them. And then if you're not sure and you really want some in detail help and want us to do it for you, we can obviously do audits of your existing network and look at that. You can also work with companies to do what's called penetration testing, which is when they try to get into your network and then do your report and help you save it. But if you follow the basics that we put out in this guidance, then you're going to be in a position where that shouldn't necessarily be needed, as it is quite expensive, but it is a great tool. And the more you move online, the more it's recommended. So that's the presentation this afternoon from ourselves on how to keep secure and how to look after yourself online and your school. If you have any questions, I'm available to answer them now if you want. If not, thank you very much for attending, and you know where we are if you need us even.